What up, YouTube? Here with another episode of Talk Boxing. On this episode, I will be giving y'all my post-fight thoughts on the fights that's titled on the video, as y'all can see. First fight I'll be giving y'all my review on was the unification middleweight title bout with Janibek Alimkhanuly taking on Vincenzo Gualiteri. It was for the WBO and IBF middleweight titles. And then I will be giving y'all my thoughts on the fight with KSI and Tommy Fury, and as well as Logan versus Dillon Dannis. And following that, I will be giving y'all my thoughts on the news that broke out of the sport of boxing with Showtime ending their ongoing partnership with PBC at the end of this year. They will no longer be broadcasting boxing or any sports that used to be featured on Showtime from next year on, and as well as Boxer, which is a English boxing promotion that is featured on Sky Sports over there in the UK, now has a deal with NBC. And as I said, first things I'll be giving y'all my thoughts on or the fights. Let's get to the post-fight thoughts with the title fight, the middleweight title fight, the WBO and IBF unification middleweight title bout with Janibek Alimkhanuly versus Vincenzo Gualiteri. Both fighters prior to this fight was undefeated. As y'all know by now, Alimkhanuly became the new unified WBO and IBF middleweight champion after scoring a 6th round TKO win in a dominant performance. This was a one-sided fight. Prior to the stoppage, I had this fight scored a shutout in favor of Alimkhanuly. This fight was all Alimkhanuly. His movement, his fluidity was top-notch, and his technicality was superb. And it was definitely displayed in this fight versus Gualiteri. And he was the more mobile, more agile, more faster fighter in this fight. And Gualiteri didn't have any answers for Alimkhanuly's attacks in this fight. Alimkhanuly showed great ring fundamentals and as well as high in-ring IQ with his ability to read the distance and his ability to control the distance as well, and as well as catching his opponents at a distance where he liked to catch them at. And whenever Gualiteri seemed to find a moment to have a open slot, the range would be back at where Alimkhanuly would want the fight to be contested at, with his faster, superior hand speed and his foot speed as well. And that's what led him to win this fight. And there was no knockdown scored in this fight. However, Gualiteri was showing signs of being damaged through the shots that Alimkhanuly was landing. I believe it came from accumulation of shots, adding its toll towards the end of the fight. However, the power shots, which was the lead hook of Alimkhanuly, and as well as the left uppercut of Alimkhanuly, those are his signature punches. And when they was landing at a clear landing, that's when Gualiteri was showing signs of those punches taking its toll on him, and he would back up and he would show that he would be in retreat mode. And if y'all saw that fight, Gualiteri throughout majority of that fight, especially towards the end of the fight, he was really in survival mode, and he wasn't throwing any shots back because he couldn't get in tune and he couldn't find his rhythm to set up his offense or have any counter shots for the attack that Alimkhanuly was landing on him. and Alimkhanuly's accuracy and his positioning was very good in this fight, and I'm looking forward to seeing Alimkhanuly in the future. And Alimkhanuly is now the only unified middleweight champion in the middleweight division. As y'all know, the last unified middleweight champion was Gennady Golovkin before Golovkin vacated the WBA and IBF middleweight titles to have that trilogy fight versus Canelo Alvarez last year. And I don't know if Triple G is going to continue fighting. He has nothing in schedule ahead of him. And Triple G, I think, respectfully speaking, he should retire. And I don't think he has any more to prove. And it's not like he's in his prime anymore anyways. Now, with that being said, the other champions at middleweight currently is the WBA middleweight champion, Erislandy Lara. He has a rumored fight coming up at a catchweight versus Danny Garcia, who in his last fight made his debut at super welterweight. And I believe from the talks that I've heard through the surfaces of boxing dirt sheets is that this fight with Lara and Garcia will be contested at 155 pounds and not at the regular middleweight weight limit, which is 160 pounds. I don't like it whenever they have a title fight for a specific weight class and it's contested at a catchweight, because it's kind of diminishing to the weight class and it devalues, from my perspective, that title. And if a fight is going to be at a catchweight, it shouldn't be for any titles. If the fighters that's going to compete for that title cannot make the weight limit for that specific weight class, then that title for that specific weight class shouldn't be on the line. And as y'all know, Erislandy Lara, he fluctuates from middleweight to super welterweight, and as I said, he's the current WBA middleweight champion. And Danny Garcia, former super lightweight champion who contested at welterweight and at lightweight as well before. He's only had one fight above welterweight, and that is at super welterweight when he defeated Barrios in his debut fight. And then now he's going to compete for the WBA middleweight title. It was supposed to happen this past summer. However, it didn't come to fruition, and they're talking about this fight possibly happening at December of this year. And both fighters fight under the PBC banner. And as I mentioned earlier, PBC and Showtime will no longer be working with each other. And if this fight does happen with Lara and Garcia, then this could be one of the final cards that PBC and Showtime put forth together. And it's more of a money fight than it is a pure boxing fight, because it's being contested at a catchweight for a middleweight title. And Lara, for boxing fans at least, has been a staple household of a name. However, amongst the public, he's not that well known, and that's compared to Danny Garcia, who's more known by the public and the casuals. And that's why I say it's more of a attraction bout than it is a legitimate title bout for the WBA middleweight title. Because if it was a on paper middleweight boxing title bout, then they would have had a long time contestant that is ranked amongst, at least by the WBA, in the top 10 of the top 10 contenders at middleweight to challenge for the WBA title. However, it's not looking that way. And Alimkhanuly, he is very smart, very sharp, very technical, and he possesses very good skills. And Alimkhanuly he is good at taking advantage of his opponent's flaws, as shown in this fight. Gualiteri has that elusive Cuban stance from when he's on the outside and not at a reachable range of his opponent, and that's having his guard down. Alimkhanuly, he is good at closing the gap to, as I said, he was controlling the distance of the fight, and how he would close that gap and make it uncomfortable for where Gualiteri would have to have his guard up instead of having his hands down and comfortable when he's not reachable. Alimkhanuly would leap with his faster feet and close that gap and be at a range where he could land his onslaught of shots. And as I said, Lara, he's more technically sound and he's more elusive and faster on his feet, and his overall agility is better than Gualiteri, as shown before and has displayed throughout all the years that Erislandy Lara has displayed his highly technical in-ring ability. It's going to be much more difficult for Alimkhanuly to put on the performance that he did versus Gualiteri, versus a fighter, a veteran champion like a Erislandy Lara, if he's going to go for another title to be added to his already unified WBO and IBF middleweight titles. And then that leaves the current WBC middleweight champion, who hasn't fought in over 2 years, and he's rumored to fight at the end of this year as well, and that is Jermall Charlo. And he is supposed to fight Jose Benavidez Jr. That's the rumored opponent for Jermall Charlo's next fight, for his in-ring return fight after being not active and not defending his WBC middleweight title over 2 years. And Jose Benavidez Jr., I think, is a good fight for Jermall Charlo, who hasn't fought in over 2 years, and for him to get that ring rust off, and that's all due respect to Mr. Jose Benavidez Jr. However, he is not a championship level material fighter that's on the level of a Alimkhanuly, Erislandy Lara, Jermall Charlo. I would say he's somewhere on the level of, I wouldn't even put him up there with a Liam Smith or a Chris Eubank Jr. or a Triple G at the level that Triple G's at right now. Maybe a Ryota Murata, a fighter of that level. I don't think he's on a Carlos Adames level. Maybe at a Julian Williams level he's at. However, as I said, that would be a good fight for Jermall Charlo's return to being back active again. And then, depending on how Jermall Charlo's performance goes for his return fight, then we could talk about Jermall Charlo being amongst the conversation of being the best middleweight champion currently active in the middleweight division right now. Because Jermall Charlo, for quite a while before he took that hiatus, he was considered the best middleweight. And I've talked about this before when I discussed the middleweight division. Carlos Adames is the current WBC interim middleweight champion right now. That means he's next in line to challenge for the legitimate, actual WBC middleweight title, which is held by Jermall Charlo. And that would line Carlos Adames up to challenge Charlo for that title if he successfully defends it in his return fight back in the ring. And Carlos Adames, he's been on a roll as of late with his recent fights. He had an impressive victory over against Julian Williams, who's had a good amount of experience of competing at a high level from the middleweight division and at super welterweight. And as I said, Carlos Adames had an impressive performance victory over on Julian Williams. And if Carlos Adames adds another victory to his ongoing streak, that would put him at a favorable spot, I wouldn't say, as I said, depending on how Jermall Charlo performs in his next fight, Adames, if he continues this streak of having these impressive victories added onto his resume and his current momentum, then that momentum will swing towards the favor of Adames. And that's how the middleweight scene is looking right now. And Alimkhanuly, he is promoted by Top Rank. And Top Rank, salute to them for being able to pull off this title unification bout with Alimkhanuly and Gualiteri. However, that fight, promotionally speaking, was a easier fight to make because Gualiteri, being a German fighter, throughout his whole professional career, he's only fought in Germany, and that partnership, that Top Rank and Gualiteri's promotion work together to make this fight happen is easier to make happen than Top Rank working with the likes of PBC, because it only involves big money fights for Top Rank and PBC to work together, and the middleweight division right now lacks that big money attraction fight being available as of right now. So it would be unlikely for the two other champions that's promoted by PBC, Erislandy Lara and Jermall Charlo, to get in there for a possible undisputed middleweight title bout or another unified middleweight title bout. And most likely we'll see Alimkhanuly fight a not that much of a hard challenge of a fight for his first title defense as the unified IBF and WBO middleweight champion for his next bout. I'm trying to think of a name that's ranked by either the IBF, the WBO, or any boxing outlets that has a ranking for the middleweights that could challenge Alimkhanuly for his unified middleweight titles. Now, I'm going to take a look at the rankings of the WBO and IBF. Those two titles is held by the current unified middleweight champion, Janibek Alimkhanuly, and it looks like the WBO has Gennady Golovkin, who hasn't fought since that third fight versus Canelo Alvarez last year. He's the number one ranked contender ranked by the WBO. Now, that would be a passing of the torch of a fight because Janibek Alimkhanuly, being from Kazakhstan, just like Gennady Golovkin is, Gennady Golovkin being the top name out of Kazakhstan and has been that for a while, and him being no longer in his prime and not being the monster that he once was. And if Alimkhanuly could get a victory over on a well-established name like Gennady Golovkin, that would be a good look for a young and up-and-coming undefeated champion like Alimkhanuly, and that would catapult Alimkhanuly definitely to the next level as far as his name goes, and his name being more recognized by more people. And by the IBF, there's a current undefeated Russian fighter by the name of Andrei Mikhailovich. He is 25-0. Now, I haven't seen any fights of him. However, he's undefeated, and he is the top-ranked contender ranked by the IBF. And with both fighters being from Eastern Europe, that could be a easier fight to make somewhere out there in the Eastern Hemisphere. And you look at other top-ranked contenders at the middleweight division right now. There's Jamie Munguia, who's undefeated, and he's promoted by Golden Boy. He's been headlining cards on his own by Golden Boy and The Zone. and he's been adding victories upon victories. He's been talked about as a top contender and a potential world champion in the future for a long time now. It's that boxing fans has been looking for Jamie Munguia to make that next step when it comes to the level of competition, and for him to take on harder and tougher challenges. And Jamie Munguia, from sources from boxing outlets and media, has been talked about that he could be a possible opponent for the moneymaker of the sport, the cash cow, the face of boxing, Saul Alvarez, despite the fact that Saul Alvarez has stopped working with the Zone and signed a new deal with PBC and Showtime. And that's why I don't understand where that talk came from, because Jamie Munguia has been mentioned to be a possible future opponent for Canelo for quite a few years now. And now with the fact that Saul Alvarez has jumped ship from the Zone to PBC, that fight is unlikely to happen. And Golden Boy, other than Ryan Garcia, I don't see Golden Boy having any household names that they promote right now in the sport of boxing. And Jamie Munguia, he has more of a local support out there whenever he fights in smaller venues like a California, in the Southern California market, and as well as I think he's fought in Texas before as well. However, he has majority of his fights being hosted in Southern California, in like Ontario, California, Anaheim, California. He doesn't fight at Staples Center. He would fight more like at the Kia Forum or the Honda Center and arenas like that, because of the quality of opponents that he fights. And he's been talked about as a future potential challenger for any of the middleweight titles, whether it be the WBC, WBO, WBA, IBF. And he's fought as super middleweight as well, so he could fluctuate in between weight classes. And I wouldn't mind seeing Jamie Munguia having a fight for a title this time, because he deserves it. He can draw when it comes to the middleweight division. I'm not talking about when it comes to overall all weight classes being involved in the sport of boxing, because when we narrow it down like that, then he's not that big of a draw like a Ryan Garcia or a Gervonta Davis, a Tyson Fury, a names of that level. Jamie Munguia is not on the same level when it comes to drawing ability like those guys that I mentioned. And that's why it would be a good look for Jamie Munguia, and it would also help him be more recognized by the fans if he actually gets a middleweight title. And Alimkhanuly would be a heck of a challenge for Jamie Munguia to possibly capture a title for real this time. And I talked about in the post-fight video to the Chris Eubank Jr. fight versus Liam Smith, with that impressive performance, that knockout win that Chris Eubank Jr. got over on Liam Smith in their second fight. That definitely put Chris Eubank Jr. to be amongst the top contenders in the middleweight division. And he is a draw, especially out there in the UK. And with Alimkhanuly not being that much big of a draw, if Top Rank and Alimkhanuly's camp doesn't have a problem fighting in the UK, then that fight could be a big fight, especially when it comes to ticket sales out there in the UK. if Chris Eubank Jr. was to get a title shot versus a new unified middleweight champion, undefeated as well, being Janibek Alimkhanuly. And that would also be a heck of a challenge for Chris Eubank Jr. And I would say, honestly speaking, Alimkhanuly, stylistically speaking as well, he is the technically more sound and skilled fighter, and I would favor Alimkhanuly to successfully defend that title versus Chris Eubank Jr. However, it would be a good look for Alimkhanuly's name to get out there more versus a familiar name, that being Chris Eubank Jr., being a second-generation star and having big field fights out there in England. That would give Alimkhanuly that championship feel level of a fight if he was to take on Chris Eubank Jr. to defend his newly unified middleweight titles. Anyways, moving on to the next subject, let's talk about the celebrity boxing fights that we saw on the Zone. They got a whole series when it comes to celebrity boxing. First fight that I'll be giving y'all my thoughts on was the fight with Logan Paul, who hasn't had a boxing fight since fighting Floyd Mayweather 2 years ago. And that fight didn't have a decision, even though Floyd Mayweather definitely outboxed him and won the fight. It was more like a sparring fight, and Floyd Mayweather was in there for the money and to keep his name surfacing and the relevancy of the sport and the public. And it was more of a exhibition bout than anything else, with Floyd Mayweather being arguably the best boxer of all time, skillfully and name-wise as well, and Logan Paul being a well-recognized public figure that helped one hand wash the other. And Logan Paul, he's been more busy with his podcasting and his pro wrestling career with the WWE. And if y'all ain't know, I cover wrestling on this channel as well. And Logan Paul can hang with the best of them when it comes to pro wrestling. And if y'all a wrestling fan, y'all know what I'm talking about. And Logan Paul, that goes to show y'all his athleticism, and he's got that zeal about him when it comes to competition, when it comes to athletic sporting events like boxing and pro wrestling. He also has a extensive amateur wrestling background. He's a all-state amateur wrestler, and that's where he gets his athleticism from, and that's why he could perform the way he performs in the WWE. And he's got a love for the sport of boxing as well, hence why, not only for clout reasons, he's taken on the sport of boxing. And he wouldn't have had another fight after that Mayweather and KSI fight again versus Dillon Dannis if he didn't have a appreciation for the sport. And this wasn't definitely something that Logan Paul needed to do, because if he wanted to do it for notoriety reasons, he already got the WWE and the podcast show that he got going on right now, and he got other ventures as well. He did it, I guess, to see where his skills are at when it comes to the sport of boxing, and to keep himself busy, as if he wasn't already busy enough. As y'all know, WWE got an event coming up next week, Crown Jewel, and Logan Paul is a part of that show as well. And for him to space that out with this fight versus Dillon Dannis and then his obligations to the WWE, it definitely wasn't for clout reasons and to keep his name relevant amongst the public. And Dillon Dannis, I wouldn't say is a tough boxing fight for Logan Paul. It would have been a tough fight if this was a mixed martial arts fight, because Dillon Dannis, he is a jiu-jitsu practitioner. He wasn't known as a striker, and he definitely wasn't known for his hands, being a jiu-jitsu guy. And Dillon Dannis, I have never seen Dillon Dannis compete in the octagon, and that's most likely due to the fact that I've tapped out when it comes to the sport of mixed martial arts. I will catch UFC fights here and there whenever they have a big stature of a fight, and I've made UFC post-fight videos on this channel as well before, and this was my first time, and this is all due respect to Dillon Dannis and what he's accomplished in his career in the sport of mixed martial arts. Honestly speaking, this was my first time hearing of Dillon Dannis, and I've heard that he is a internet guy, and Dillon Dannis talks a lot of trash on the internet, hence why this fight got the hype that it got. And during the build-up to this fight, they had a lot of bickering, a lot of back and forth with the two, and I think it was the final press conference leading up to this fight. Dillon Dannis, from the commentators that was commentating this fight, has said that Dillon Dannis threw a microphone at the eye of Logan Paul, and it kind of damaged Logan Paul's eyes prior to them actually boxing it out in this fight. And this fight wasn't competitive at all. It was a shutout. Dillon Dannis did not have a moment in this fight. The only moment Dillon Dannis had in this fight was when he talked trash and teased Logan Paul. And he was talking trash more than he was throwing blows in this fight. He was in his shell and talking crap to Logan Paul while in his shell throughout the whole fight. And his moment was when he tried to grapple the legs of Logan Paul and went for a shoot double leg takedown in a boxing match in the final round. And earlier on in the fight, he would open up his legs to invite Logan Paul to roll with them, as if this was a jiu-jitsu grappling match or a MMA fight, when this was a boxing fight. And Logan Paul was laughing at that. And I'm quite sure the fans got a good laugh out of that as well. Like, what is Dillon Dannis doing? He's not throwing punches. He's just talking crap. And he's not taking this fight serious. He's asking Logan Paul to roll with him as if they got a jiu-jitsu gear on, or as if they're in the octagon. What is this about? And Logan Paul was just throwing shots at a punching bag. It looked like a training session for Logan Paul more than it was a legitimate bout. And this was obviously a shutout. The only hot moment in this fight was when Dillon Dannis purposely fell on the ground at the end of the fight, and Logan Paul kind of got back at Dillon Dannis for Dillon Dannis grappling at the legs of Logan Paul, going for a takedown, which was quite a bit of a mockery to the sport of boxing, if you was to ask me. And Logan Paul, the funny part was when he looked at the camera, when he went back to the corner as a referee was deducting a point from Dillon Dannis for that foul play, he would say, hey, he got a wrestling background. He's a well-accomplished all-state wrestler during his high school wrestling career. And I don't know if they're going to have another encounter, as Dillon Dannis, I'm quite sure him being a internet guy, I don't know if he called out Logan Paul for a MMA fight, an amateur wrestling match, a jiu-jitsu match. I don't know. I definitely don't want to see another boxing fight with Dillon Dannis and Logan Paul. I don't want to see Dillon Dannis box ever again after this. And this is me respectfully, but honestly speaking. And Logan Paul, his petty get back was when Dillon Dannis fell on the canvas. He would throw a ground and pound shot towards Dillon Dannis, and then Dillon Dannis, he was hot when he got back up on his feet, and he charged at Logan Paul, and then the security and all the other ringside attendants had to get in the ring to defuse the situation, and that was like the biggest moment that happened in the fight. And other than that, there was no real highlight, real moments that was displayed out of this fight with Paul and Dannis. And then the next fight, which was a main event, it was a fight with KSI and Tommy Fury. Now, I'm going to be honest with y'all. I talked about how Logan Paul, he hasn't fought and competed in the sport of boxing in over 2 years. However, his brother Jake Paul, he's the one who's more active with the sport of boxing. I don't think Jake Paul has his own podcast. I don't know what the deal is with Logan Paul's venture and his energy drink Prime. I know KSI is a part of that venture and that project called Prime. I don't know what Jake Paul has to do with it. I don't know if Jake Paul got his own vlog channel. If he does, I don't keep up with it. And Jake Paul, he fought Tommy Fury. I don't know if that was his last fight. Matter of fact, I think Jake Paul's last fight was versus Nate Diaz this past summer. And I think he got a decision victory over on Nate Diaz in that fight. And that was his bounce back fight from his defeat that he suffered versus Tommy Fury. And I think that was his first loss in his pro boxing career. And that was versus Tommy Fury. And I did not even see any highlights, any clips from that fight with Paul and Fury. However, from what I heard from the boxing fans that did tap into this fight, they were saying Tommy Fury barely edged out Jake Paul to get the win in their fight. And Jake Paul, he's been beating other YouTubers for his, I think, first 1 or 2 fights. He beat other YouTubers and other vloggers, and then he knocked out Robinson, who's a basketball player. He had an athletic background. However, he's not trained when it comes to combat sports. And then after he was done fighting a ball player and other vloggers, he went on to fight MMA fighters, and he was racking up victories versus MMA fighters. However, when he got in there with Tommy Fury, who comes from the legendary boxing family of the Furies, he took a L in that fight. And it was impressive the fact that he went the distance versus a Fury. However, Tommy Fury, unlike Tyson Fury, who is a dedicated, undefeated, well-accomplished lineal and he's no longer the lineal heavyweight champion. He's still the current WBC heavyweight champion. Tommy Fury was a reality show star in a show out there in England, and he was more known because of that than his pro boxing career. And his fight versus Jake Paul helped him start his pro boxing career. I know he's had prior professional boxing bouts before that fight versus Jake Paul. However, this got him back on the scene of pro boxing, even though he's fighting non-legitimate boxing fighters at this level and this stage where Tommy Fury's at with his pro boxing career and his record. He'll be fighting other cab drivers and boxers who have a job outside of boxing, and boxing would be their side gig, and journeymen and fighters of that level. So it's not that big of a difference. However, he's fighting vloggers from YouTube who have a name already for him to get recognized by the public, even though he would be getting notoriety due to the fact that he is a Fury whenever he has a boxing fight, much like how Muhammad Ali's grandson, he's been getting the coverage with his boxing fights, even though he is very early in his boxing career. It would be kind of the same for Tommy Fury, especially out there in England where they emphasize their involvement and their valuing when it comes to the coverage of the sport of boxing. And this fight, I thought KSI had a good plan in this fight when it comes to making this fight very uncomfortable and very messy for Tommy Fury and his style. And he utilized Tommy Fury's size advantage to his disadvantage. I'm talking about his reach and his style. And because he would neutralize that reach advantage, that size factor advantage, because KSI would close that gap by lunging in at Tommy Fury. And when he got to close range, he would smother Tommy Fury and making him more of a grappling, wrestling, smothering, in close range style of a fight. And he would throw body shots when he would be in close range, and Tommy Fury's arms and hands wouldn't be loosened for him to throw shots on the inside versus KSI, and KSI would use his shoulders and elbows and other parts of his bodies while maneuvering, while in close range, to make it very uncomfortable for Tommy Fury. And it would have the referee to step in to have a distance between the two fighters. And whenever there would be a separation with the two fighters, Tommy Fury wouldn't be fast enough and his timing would be off when it comes to timing KSI and catching KSI trying to close that gap versus him. Tommy Fury just wasn't quick enough with his hands, with his ability to telegraph, and that's what was costing him in this fight versus KSI. And Tommy Fury would definitely show frustration and signs of inexperience in this fight, as he didn't really know what to do with this fight being uncomfortable for him, and he didn't know how to neutralize the plan of KSI and his smothering and his ability to close that gap and making it uncomfortable for Tommy Fury when they would be at a close distance, as he would keep on hitting the back of the head of KSI, and that would cost a point for Tommy Fury. I think it happened in the second round where the referee deducted a point from Tommy Fury for hitting KSI in the back of the head when he was warned already. And that's what played a factor in my scorecards, regardless of the fact that I would have had this fight scored in the favor of KSI. Out of a 6-round fight, I had this fight scored 4 rounds to 2 in favor of KSI. I had this fight scored 58-55. It would have been 58-56 if it wasn't for the point deduction. I gave the first 2 rounds to KSI, as well as the final round and the 5th round as well to KSI. And Tommy Fury, to many boxing fans, they were saying, because leading up to this fight, John Fury, who's the father of Tommy Fury, said he would cut off all communications with Tommy if he was to lose to a YouTube vlogger like KSI in a boxing fight, when the Fury family has built their whole legacy on the sport of boxing. And that's why the fans trolled how they troll on the dirt sheets, the internet. They like to have fun with it. I'm trying to be as respectful, as most respectful as possible. And that's why people were saying, oh, he made the Fury family look bad. He made the sport of boxing look bad. Tommy Fury ain't a real Fury. He ain't a real boxer. That comes with the territory when they sign up for fights like this and of this magnitude. However, a fight is a fight. And I thought KSI got the better of Tommy Fury that night. And I thought the judges gave Tommy Fury a favoritism of a victory, and it was a controversial one for sure. And would I like to see another fight with KSI and Tommy Fury? It would definitely draw, especially out there in the UK with both fighters being from the UK, and that's why another fight with KSI and Tommy Fury would make sense, and it would draw as well. And with that being said, that does it for the post-fight coverages with the fights that is titled to be discussed on this episode of Talk Boxing. Now moving on to the next subject. A important major news broke out for the sport of boxing a few weeks ago, and that announcement came from Paramount, CBS, and Showtime, announcing that Showtime Sports will no longer be a part of their program starting from next year, which means that Showtime Boxing, which has been around since the 80s, they will no longer be broadcasted on Showtime or the Paramount Plus app or on CBS. And boxing has been a thing for premium networks, as I said, since the 80s, and HBO and Showtime, which are from majority stance of a view that Showtime and HBO are the only two major premium networks on cable television, and HBO and Showtime since the 80s, since they decided to have boxing as a part of their network, had a rivalry for a long time. That was until HBO announced that they will no longer be broadcasting boxing as a part of their network back in the end of 2016. I think that's when HBO said that they will no longer be airing the sport of boxing on HBO. And to many boxing fans and to the public, HBO had the reputation of having the best boxing program when it came to the sport of boxing. And then Showtime was the only premium network in America to air boxing, because HBO wasn't doing that anymore. And that major shift happened once Floyd Mayweather jumped ship from HBO to Showtime, and Manny Pacquiao's values started to dwindle down after he lost to Timothy Bradley, and then he had those questionable fights versus Juan Manuel Marquez. His first two fights versus Marquez wasn't hurtful at all. However, the third fight versus Marquez, which no knockdowns was scored during that fight, unlike the first two fights that we saw contested with Pacquiao and Marquez, where Pacquiao was the only one scoring the knockdown. And in the third fight, there was no knockdown scored in the favor of Pacquiao. And clearly, Marquez, from my perspective at least, he had won that fight and outboxed Pacquiao. And out of those four fights, if I was to talk about that legendary, iconic rivalry that we saw with Marquez and Pacquiao, 3 out of those 4 fights I thought Juan Manuel Marquez won. And obviously the fourth and final fight that we saw with these two wasn't any questions left, because Marquez won by the knockout of the year for that year during that fourth and final fight with those two iconic legends. And that's when Pacquiao, who was the most biggest attraction that HBO had on their network, with that L that he took, that helped shift the momentum of who was considered the top network when it comes to the coverage of the sport of boxing. And with PBC and Floyd Mayweather and Al Heyman jumping ship from working with Showtime when they've been working with HBO throughout their whole career, and then PBC announcing that they would be bringing back the sport of boxing to regular cable TV. Y'all remember when PBC became a franchise after becoming their own promotion, with Floyd Mayweather jumping ship from HBO to Showtime and PBC becoming a banner of their own. They brought boxing back to CBS, Fox Sports, Fox, NBC, NBC Sports, and ESPN, Bounce TV, Spike TV, and that was a good look for the sport of boxing, because after the 80s, boxing, other than I think it was Tuesday night fights and Friday night fights, which was broadcasted on ESPN, I think ESPN was the only regular cable network that was airing boxing on the regular on their channel besides HBO and Showtime. So it was PBC and Al Heyman for the first time since after the 80s that they would have boxing being aired on regular cable TV. And that brought a rejuvenation of a feeling to the sport of boxing. And HBO and Top Rank and Golden Boy and whatever other promotions that was still working with HBO didn't make a move like that. And that's what put Showtime on top, and that's what I think helped HBO stop working with the sport of boxing and end their venture with the sport of boxing after 2016. And for Showtime to last this long with the sport of boxing, and it's not like they cut off only the sport of boxing. They said Showtime Sports will no longer be a thing with with Paramount and CBS and Showtime. And does that hurt the sport of boxing? Not really. And I say that because I think this is the evolution of times, and I think this is the sport of boxing adapting with the times. As we know, The Zone was the first network, a app company, to start airing and broadcasting and covering the sport of boxing as a part of their app. And apps and streaming apps that cover sports, having boxing added to their franchise, I think is the works of the times. And it's rumored that Al Heyman and PBC will be looking to sign a new deal with Amazon Prime as a network and a streaming app to cover their fights. And as we know, for those that have the Amazon Prime subscription, they have Thursday Night Football. I don't know what other sports Amazon Prime covers. I don't tap in to TV shows that much. And I don't know what shows Amazon Prime covers. And I know they had that Lord of the Rings show that was on Amazon Prime, and that was exclusive to their network. I think they had another show with Sylvester Stallone that was a Amazon Prime show that was exclusive to them. And adding boxing to their franchise, like how Thursday Night Football is exclusive on Amazon Prime would be a good look for Amazon Prime. And Amazon Prime, from what I've heard through sources, is that Amazon Prime isn't scared to invest money into all kinds of things. And for them to invest into PBC, and PBC has been considered the top promotion for the sport of boxing for a long time now, wouldn't be that much of a risky of a move for Amazon Prime to make. And as I said, that would be boxing catching up with the times. And if Showtime isn't afraid to move on and to make adjustments as the times go on, then neither should the sport of boxing and neither should PBC. And that means that Matchroom and Golden Boy and Eddie Hearns and The Zone won't be the only ones that air the sport of boxing on a streaming app. It would be now Al Heyman, Floyd Mayweather, and PBC that would be catching up to Eddie Hearns, Oscar De La Hoya, and other promotions that have their fights aired on The Zone, which is a streaming app. And now PBC will be on a streaming app if they decide to work out a deal with Amazon Prime. And PBC and Showtime, I would say overall the whole sport of boxing has had the best year this year in a long time. And I would say from my lifetime, this has been the best year of the sport of boxing since, I would say, the early 2000s. And that's because we've had the best fights that the fans has been asking for happen this year. And hopefully they continue on this momentum next year and on. And the reason why that PBC stopped airing on regular cable TV, and as y'all know, Showtime was the only network that stuck around with PBC when PBC announced that they would broadcast their fights on regular TV. And now that it has ended, they'll, as I said, most likely move on to streaming apps. And PBC is because when that deal was announced and fights was being made after that deal was announced, they wasn't putting on the best fights. They was putting on fights just to put on fights. That's what that was. And that's what helped PBC not have their contract extended with these cable networks. And hopefully when or if Amazon and PBC reach a deal, they don't do what they did with their first deal that they had when they brought back the sport of boxing to regular cable TV, and they continue putting on fights like Terrence Crawford and Errol Spence, and hopefully next year the winner of Benavidez and Andrade gets a undisputed super middleweight title fight versus Canelo Alvarez. And as we know, PBC, they signed Terrence Crawford and Canelo Alvarez. Terrence Crawford, who for a long time was with Top Rank and ESPN, and then he had that fight before fighting Errol Spence on, I think it was called Black Prom or something like that. It was a exclusive app that aired that fight with Terrence Crawford versus, I forgot the name of dude that Terrence Crawford fight before fighting Errol Spence, and as well as I think Adrian Broner's fight versus Bill Hutchinson was aired on that same streaming app as well. And then to make that fight happen versus Errol Spence, he signed a multi-fight deal with PBC and Showtime, and now that Showtime will no longer be airing PBC fights on their network, that means that Terrence Crawford and his future fights, along with all other PBC fighters and that work with PBC, if they do get a deal with Amazon Prime, they will have their fights being aired on Amazon Prime instead of it being aired on Showtime. Now, I think pay-per-view fights will be separate from regular Amazon Prime fights. If they do sign a deal with Amazon, pay-per-view fights like a Canelo fight, like a Errol Spence, Terrence Crawford fight, those fights will probably be pay-per-view exclusive, with it being titled Amazon Prime on pay-per-view for those pay-per-view worthy fights, with other fights being on regular Amazon Prime for subscribers being able to watch those fights on regular Amazon Prime and not having to pay a additional fee for a pay-per-view fight. And it's like that with the Zone. And when the Zone puts on pay-per-view fights, it's called the Zone pay-per-view, and regular subscribers gotta pay a additional fee to watch a pay-per-view fight, and all the other fights will be aired on regular The Zone, the streaming app. And I think that's how it will work. And as far as it being special, I don't think it'll be any big major special feel to PBC being moved from Showtime, a premium network, to a streaming app. It will only be a change of platforms. Instead of paying an additional fee to have Showtime on your cable TV, people will be paying for Amazon Prime, the streaming app. That's the only difference. And for convenience sake, many people have moved on from regular cable TV and having Showtime and HBO to having streaming apps like Netflix, Amazon, The Zone, NBC Peacock, and whatever other streaming apps that there is out there. And you look at Showtime and HBO, they have streaming apps as well now. You got HBO Max, you got Paramount Plus, with Showtime shows being on Paramount Plus. That's why it would make sense for boxing to move on from premium network to a exclusive streaming app. And as I said, for it to keep its momentum and to have a interest be sparked, and it having a major announcement of a field, if they do reach a deal with Amazon Prime or any other streaming network services, then they would have to continue putting on these top level fights that the fans want to see, and not do the BS that they did from when they first initially became a promotion. PBC and CBS, NBC, Fox, and ESPN, Bounce, and Spike, and all the other networks that there was there when PBC first became a thing. And we'll wait and see what PBC's next move will be. All we know now is that Showtime Sports is no longer going to be a thing starting from next year. And that's because Paramount Plus, Showtime, and CBS announced that. And Showtime Boxing has been a household, recognizable figure for the sport of boxing since the 80s. As I said, they had Floyd Mayweather fights, major Mike Tyson fights. They had a whole lot of fights that's considered legendary to the sport of boxing. And I'm sure before the year ends, Showtime will have a collectible of their best, most memorable fights being broadcasted on Showtime for them to pay tribute for Showtime boxing for as long as it lasted. And for them to outlast HBO boxing is impressive because, as I said, HBO was considered the home of boxing, and to have the best boxing fights, and for Showtime to last longer than that, they beat out HBO, and that's a good look for Showtime, and that's an accomplishment to hold on to. And as I said, there was another announcement from the sport of boxing, and this involves another streaming app broadcasting the sport of boxing, and that is The Boxer, which is a promotion based out of the UK, and their fights are aired on Sky Sports over there in the UK, and they will have Sky Sports Boxer exclusive fights being broadcasted on Peacock, the app, which is NBC. They have NBC exclusive shows. I think they cover NBC NFL games on the app. And if you're a wrestling fan like me, they cover WWE. They have exclusive WWE pay-per-view events being aired on the Peacock app, and as well as I think NXT Level Up as well, and other coverages of the WWE on that app. And if you're a NASCAR fan, they cover NASCAR, and if you're a golf fan, they cover golf on that streaming app as well. And now they will have Boxer / Sky Sports exclusive fights being aired on NBC Peacock app, and that's a good look for the sport of boxing. And if you're a boxing fan, this would be a reason for boxing fans to subscribe to NBC's Peacock, because as y'all know, the UK does a better job at covering and paying their homage and respect to the sport of boxing than they do over here in America. And NBC Peacock, the app, is only $6 a month, and that's cheaper compared to the Zone. I think the Zone, for a monthly fee, if you don't sign up for a yearly subscription to the Zone, I think it's $25 a month to have the Zone, the app. And Amazon Prime, I think, is $15 a month, and Peacock is the cheapest app that's available out there for sports fans to enjoy sports and whatever sports and shows that they feature on this app. And ESPN Plus, if you have Disney Plus, the package which has ESPN and Hulu, I think that subscription fee is $25 a month as well. And if you want ESPN Plus by itself, I think it's $11 a month. And ESPN would be the only remaining cable network that airs the sport of boxing on regular cable TV, and they work exclusively with Top Rank. And some fights, they will have it exclusively being aired on ESPN Plus, the app. However, fights that are broadcasted on regular ESPN is shown on ESPN Plus, the app, as well. For those that don't have regular cable TV and have the ESPN Plus app, they can watch and catch the ESPN fights that's aired on regular ESPN on the ESPN Plus app. And as I said, the pay-per-view title does not change when it comes to pay-per-view fights being separate from the regular fights that are regular cable TV or app exclusive fights. Pay-per-view fights are pay-per-view exclusive fights, with the network that covers that pay-per-view fight only having their name on the title in front of the pay-per-view. And I'm looking forward to boxing's adaptation with the times and this growth and this change to the sport of boxing, it being from regular cable TV to premium network TV and now to streaming app services. And that's it for this episode of Talk Boxing. Y'all let me know what y'all opinions are in the comments. Comment, subscribe, share, like, all that good stuff. And click the links in the description to show y'all support. And I'm out of here, y'all. Peace.